pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Roll call, please. I'll start. Jose Gutierrez Jr.
Greg Coladonato.
Laura Blakely, Tamara Wilson.
Ellen Wheeler.
Let the record reflect that all members of the Mountain View Wisconsin School Board of Trustees are present. Approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Madam Wheeler, seconded by Madam Blakely. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Review and action. Certificated staff recommended for permanent status. Who is leading the honors? The floor is yours.
Okay, welcome everyone. So tonight we're going to do, I have a little plan that we need to follow so we can get through this smoothly. And we are excited to celebrate with 24 teachers who have earned their permanent status with our district. It's a lot of determination and a lot of hard work and a lot of paperwork to get that done. And we want to celebrate with them. So first I need the board while they're seated to actually do the review and action part, and please approve this as we recommend so we can get to the celebration part.
So somebody has the official language if you can.
I have it.
Yeah.
I just clicked on it right now.
Yeah.
Popped up. Okay. Recommended action that the Board of Trustees grant the certificated employees permanent status in the Mountain View Wisconsin School District beginning with the 2017-2018 school year. I'd like to make that motion.
Second.
Moved by Trustee Gutierrez, seconded by Madam Blakely. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Congratulations,
Welcome.
everybody. So the next step of this little dance is to let you know that we would like, I'm going to call you up one by one. The board is going to come out and shake your hand. You'll be given a little treat prize. And please stand over there so that we can have a group photo at the end. Okay? All right, I gave good directions. Okay, thank you. You guys are gonna help? All right. This is in alphabetical order, and I will also say your school. So Nanette Baltazar from Montaloma. Esther Diaz from Mistral. Allison Faciotto, Montaloma. Tari Gaffney from Crittenden. Carlos Guzman Hernandez from Crittenden. Kyle Hilbrecht from Stevenson. Allison Houghton from Graham. Elizabeth Kelly from Graham. Douglas Lang from Crittenden. Natalie La Rosa, Stevenson. Dorothy Lau from Castro. Joanne Liu from Landals. Amy Liu from Castro. Elise Martinez from Therkoff. Tracy Navarez from Castro. Michael Newman from Crittenden. Julie Pham from Therkoff. Evan Refold from Crittenden. Samantha Shellhammer from Montaloma. Savitha Srivatsa. I said it right. Srivatsa. Stevenson. Jenny Lynn Unidia from Castro. Bailey Waldman from Crittenden. Helen Wong from Huff. And Linda Young from Therkoff. Esther Diaz. Esther Diaz again. No. Okay, give them another round of applause. When we see family members and supporters here, give yourselves a round of applause. That's a lot of work. There's a lot of listening that goes into the first 2 years of teaching. So we thank you. So I'm not a photographer, but I think we need a better setup there for. If you guys would remain, Emily Zapata would like to say a few words.
Thank you. Oh, okay. So as a district and an association, we've always strived to be the place where talented and new young teachers wanted to begin their careers and continue to strive as leaders in education. And today we celebrate you because you have proven that education is much more than being a teacher. We all play many roles, and we look out for the whole child. And these teachers, you are the example of that. So our students, parents, community, and association, thank you for all your hard work and dedication to ensuring that our students have the best educational experience possible. Congratulations and thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. The board can be seated. You all can be seated. Thank you very much. Okay, don't.
Now we have a party?
I think so.
I think we'll do opportunity for members of the public. Oh, gotcha. Okay. Okay, I gotcha. Now we're moving on to section 3, opportunity for members of the public to address the board on items that are on the closed session agenda. If anyone would like to opine, by all means, please feel free to step up to the podium. Being that there's no one that would like to do that, we'll move on to closed session at 7:11 p.m.
Apparently the party happens while we're in closed
Well, we're
session.
gone, yeah. Oh, so, really?
That's not how I remember it, but.
my new crown's in, so my
Good,
tooth is
good.
doubly exposed.
It's permanent?
Yeah, the temple. So everything
Yeah.
in my mouth, I had to like. Yeah, the cold still sticking.
No, Bill's here too. Look at this. Bill misses it. This will keep me happy all meeting.
It's like you're fuzzy at the end.
Yeah. Laura's in the bathroom. I know you're not.
Oh, okay.
So
How do
I get
become a
all the
member?
membership
I'm
stuff.
sorry. I probably just forgot.
LWV.
Yeah, just go in.
LAMV.org. So LA, Los Altos Mountain View.org. Or just Google Los Altos Mountain View.
I'll just put it on my calendar, otherwise nothing happens.
Yeah. So let me, since Laura isn't here. Was that the wrong one? No. Oh, are you enjoying it? Yeah. I thought that was written by him.
No, it's a different guy. This is
Okay.
actually his first
Okay.
book.
Good evening. Thank you for coming back, trustees. I'd like to report that from closed session, a government claim was presented to the district on June 13th, 2017. Upon consideration in closed session, the board has denied the claim. Moving on to consent agenda.
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved by Madam Wheeler, seconded by Madam Wilson. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, trustees. Communications. Any member of the employee organizations groups would like to speak up at the podium? Nope. District committees? No. Superintendent? Right, sure, no problem. Superintendent, any updates?
No updates at this time.
Okay. Honorable Nelson?
Thank you. My name is Stephen Nelson. I wanted to make a public comment on something that I did send to the board as a written input to this meeting. This has to do with district committees. There is a Brown Act requirement or derivative of Brown Act requirement for some of the district committees that sometimes haven't been 100% followed. All votes of subsidiary public committees of the board need to be properly recorded. The problems have come up with the Parcel Tax Committee, which is a statutory committee that reports to the board. The school site councils, which also are statutory committees, they have to report to the school board on different votes on things. The bond oversight committee, which based on the wording of the bond, need to report to the board and is set up as a statutory advisory committee to the board. All the school ELACs and the district ELAC. Those committees need to record their vote by who voted for what. And that includes they need to vote on their minutes, which need to be formal minutes, not informal notes of the principal. So I didn't get a reply on this from the superintendent. Of course, I guess it's written to the board and the president, so that's a free pass.
Well, it shouldn't be Trustee Nelson, but
Yeah,
I'm looking into that. That explains my. I didn't want to send you just a typical response.
that's
Thank
okay.
you for sending.
That's
a
okay.
email.
If I don't know how many of the members of the board still have the Brown Act booklet that I bought when the San Diego Convention and numbers go. I know I gave mine to Trustee Wilson after I got off the board, and I gave you one. You still have it, and I guess Trustee Coldonado. I don't know about Trustee Wilson. Trustee Wilson doesn't have it. It's a $20 booklet. They really charge you, but you can probably get the district to pay for it. It advises on school board members on what they need to do to make sure their advisory committees follow the Open Records Act or open acts that we need to. So the DAC isn't a statutory committee. It was set up by the superintendent to advise him. It doesn't apply. And fortunately, Dr. Rudolph has done a good job of those committees that he's had as advisory committees. He runs them in a very open way and with, videos and all sorts of kinds of stuff. So that's as much transparency as you could ask for, I think, from a superintendent's advisory committees. But these other ones, there is a legal requirement that their votes be recorded and that their minutes be officially recorded so that you know that the law is being followed and that everybody else who wants to look at who's voting for what on those advisory committees has the ability to go back and see, oh, this person didn't support so-and-so when they were on this committee. Maybe I don't want to support them for school board when they run for school board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Nelson.
Wow.
As many of you members have guessed, right now in the community comment section, if there are any other members of the community that would like to comment about items that are not on the agenda, by all means, feel free to step up to the podium. And I will echo your sentiment, Trustee Coronado. Honorable Nelson timed it perfectly.
You spoke for exactly the right amount of maximum time.
Thank you.
It's called having your elevator speech ready.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Moving on to review and action. Tentative agreements between the Mountain View Wisma School District and Mountain View Educators Association, CTA/NEA, MVEA, and certificated salary schedule for 2017-2018.
Good evening. There's a lot of information there, which you all, I know, read carefully. We're really excited that we had good negotiations, came to strong agreements together, made some big decisions to change the salary schedule format, as you saw, and some other things that had been discussed for a while, and we made good progress. So we would like you to approve this so it can move forward and all the work can be done to improve everyone's salaries.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion? Well, I think at this point, does anyone have any questions? If we're going to follow the procedure, right? Are there any questions from the members of the board?
I have one question. Ms. Robinson, is this the second year of this contract? We have finished 1 year of our 3-year contract. This is the first renegotiation.
This was the
to
first.
cover the second of the 3 years of the 3-year deal.
This is the first year after the 3-year. This is the first successor year.
Okay.
Any other simple questions? Complicated ones, Greg? Any members of the community that would like to speak to this issue? Do I hear a motion?
Move to approve?
Second.
Moved by Madam Wilson, seconded by Trustee Caldonado, that the board approve the tentative agreement between the Mountain View Wisconsin School District and the Mountain View Educators Association, CTA/NEA, and the certificated salary schedule for the 2017-2018 year as presented. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on to B, Community Health Awareness Council SHAC, Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU.
Good evening. I'm here to ask the board to approve the memo of understanding with our CHAC, Community Health Awareness Council, to serve our schools in providing counseling services to all of our elementary schools in the district and continue the service, the great partnership that we have with CHAC.
Trustees, any questions? Any members of the community that would like to speak about this issue? Honorable Nelson?
I don't have a card, but I would like to double up on a comment I made in the voice, which was this comment of who's the genie of this place. And I think this is an example of Dr. Rudolph becoming the genie of this place. He's starting to understand the community. He's starting to do things like shift money into programs that make a big difference and are supported by the majority of the residents of this community. Putting more money into CHAC is exactly one of those kinds of things that I think genie of the community. He's starting in some instances to be the genius who understands what this community is acting for and using the money that we have to do those programs.
Thank you. Any other member of the community that would like to speak on this issue? Okay. Board members, a motion?
I move to approve the MOU with CHAC.
Second.
Moved by Madam Blakely, seconded by Madam Wilson, that the Board of Trustees ratify the memorandum of understanding as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Construction contract award for the Stevenson Elementary School Preschool District Office Phase 2, Increment 1, Site Work Project. Dr. Clark.
Thank you. Staff recommends approval to award the construction contract to Galeb Paving for the Stevenson Preschool District Office Phase 2 Increment 1 project to do the site work in the amount of $3,702,000.
Trustees, any questions? Any members of the community that would like to speak to this issue? Motion, please.
Move to approve?
Second by me. Moved by Madam Wilson, seconded by Trustee Gutierrez, that the Board of Trustees award the construction contract for the Stevenson Elementary School Preschool District Office Phase 2, Increment 1, Site Work Project to Galeb Paving Incorporated in the amount of $3,702,000. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Board Policy Number 6145, Extracurricular and Co-Curricular Activities. Kathy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Every year, we are required to review with the board this board policy on extracurricular and co-curricular activities. There was one small change that you can see in the policy, really just spelling out the prohibited categories of discrimination with replacing them with the words prohibited categories of discrimination. So we're recommending tonight that you approve the policy at first reading and waive second reading.
Trustees, any questions? Any members of the community that would like to speak to this issue? Do I hear a motion, trustees?
I move that we approve the board policy number 6145 regarding extracurricular and co-curricular activities at the first reading and waive the second reading.
Second.
Moved by Madam Blakely, seconded by Ms. Wheeler, that the board approve board policy number 6145, extracurricular and co-curricular activities at first reading and waive second reading. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Review and discussion, 2016-2017 unaudited actual report. Dr. Clark.
Good evening. I'm here tonight to present the 2016-2017 unaudited actual report for the board's review. Luckily, it doesn't require any action because this is what happened last year and there's no reason to vote on it. So some highlights for the 16-17 school year, though it's coming. So just a few highlights from the 16-17 school year. In the board packet, you received the board presentation that I'm giving tonight, the PowerPoint. You also received a user-friendly budget. Hopefully it's user-friendly to our community. And there's also the obligatory 180-page SACS document,
Right.
which is a requirement by state. So some of the highlights for 16-17, this was our first full school year of the Strategic Plan 2021 implementation. We also did had the response to instruction pilot. Language arts curriculum adoption happened over the summer of last year. Staff also received an 8% increase in compensation. The assessed valuation of property in Mountain View grew by 12.7% over the prior year. And then also Measure C, technically, our parcel tax technically ended in June, but fortunately for us, Mountain View voters supported the district by passing Measure B in May. So those two things carried on. So for the next year, so for the actual numbers for 16-17 unaudited actual, you'll see the unrestricted programs, restricted programs, and then also the combined. So for us as a school year, we ended up as an ending balance in unrestricted of just over $22 million. Now our estimated actual was right at 20 million and some change, which was pretty close. When you combine with the restricted to get a combined ending balance of 25,129,405, which ends us with a reserve for 16-17 at right at 33.5%. At second interim, we projected 16-17 to end at 28%. And as we get into the next slide, I'll give you some more details about why. Okay, thanks. But well, I'll tell you now. So kind of the reason for that ending balance, that 22,244,000, the unrestricted ending balance. Our property taxes came in a little higher than estimated at the end of the year. There was like the last rush of property taxes that came in, just over 100,000. It's not a huge amount, but it helps. Our contribution to some of the other programs were down. Special ed did not require as much contribution as we had budgeted, which was nice. Leases and rentals came in a little higher than projected at second interim going out for to close the year. Some donations came in at the end of the year in certain accounts mostly for the schools. So that helped. And then also the STIRS on behalf line where we have to recognize our STIRS payment for the teachers. We projected that a little higher than what it actually happened at the end. So as we get to the 16-17 year rolling forward into the MYP. So on this slide, I tried to get it to where 16-17 column is the unaudited actual. That's the beginning balance. Those are the combined numbers now. So we started the 2016-17 school year in July right at $25 million. Total revenues, total expenditures, and you see the net increase or decrease. And for us, the 16-17 school year, when you add up all those kind of bits and pieces through all those different budget lines, we actually ended the year in the black by $165,000, which was nice. So now you have an ending balance of 16-17. That ending balance now rolls forward to begin the 17-18 school year. So what we did to kind of give you an idea, kind of the board a picture of what our adopted budget will look like in the future, we took the 17-18 adopted budget in June and fixed or adjusted the beginning balance July 1 of the 17-18 school year. So when we adopted the budget in June, that number was 22,692,000 and change. But now it gets changed, it gets adjusted, and actually that number is larger. So what we see is an actual higher beginning balance, which translates into a higher ending balance. The revenues and expenditures have not changed because that was the adopted budget in June. And that's the budget that we have to show to the public because that's the last board adopted budget. We will make those changes at first interim though. Some of the changes, there wasn't as much, MOT did not require as much of a contribution that we expected them I already talked about the STRS on behalf payments. The special ed contribution was not as much as it needed to, or we projected. And that's pretty much the bulk of the changes. So moving forward, if you take those numbers in 17-18, what we showed as the 17-18 school year right now, it turns out to be right at 30% for 17-18. That's 29.9% as a reserve level. At the adopted budget, it was 27%. So it is pretty close to where we were in June with the adopted multi-year projection. We just now made the adjustment for 16-17. That's kind of where we are. Any
Trustees, questions, trustees?
Dr. Clark, help me remember, what was the bottom right-hand corner number of the 2017-18 budget we adopted? Like, I remember it being a single digit. 7%,
without the
6%, something like that.
The assessed valuation?
No, the reserve level in the furthest out multi-year projection was like single digits.
Without the parcel tax.
I don't, it wasn't single digits. Not in the third year when we adopted the 17-18 budget. I can't remember for sure.
Maybe the fourth year?
Maybe the fourth year.
Okay.
Yeah.
How should we expect those numbers to change in light of how these numbers kind of improved?
So since the 17-18 adopted budget with that MYP for those 2 years is the last board adoption, these numbers don't reflect any changes that are coming, but a couple of them are coming at first interim. The biggest one is the assessed valuation growth, that the final number that we had for 17-18 over the prior year. So we built the 17-18 adopted budget with 7% assessed valuation growth for 17-18, and it is 10.57. So and that puts about $1.6 million of ongoing revenue into the district's budget. So I was really tempted to show you those numbers tonight, but I didn't want anyone to get confused because those are not adopted numbers. But we do know at first interim that will make a huge difference of adding 1.6 million of ongoing revenue over the next 3 years. There's also the board adopted the 17-18 budget in June prior to the state adopting the final state budget. And there was also that one-time discretionary money that was finally allocated out. I brought to the board in the spring when we were doing the assumptions. The governor wanted to put approximately $1 billion or 800 million number to the schools, but wanted to give it in the 18-19 school year. So it was like, don't plan on it, but it's coming. When the state enacted the budget, it was, no, we're going to give it to you in the 17-18. So for us, that will show up at first interim, and that is approximately right at $725,000. It's one time, but it will help the bottom line for us. And then those are the two biggest changes that'll come at first interim. So to go back to your question, what will it look like at first interim when we look at 19-20? That will actually look quite a bit better. Yes.
Thank you.
So according to the April presentation, the budget assumption was 5.66 in 19-20.
And we were all mumbling over here. That was built on, we couldn't plan on passage of the parcel tax until we passed it.
Correct.
Dr. Clark, I have a question for you. So the one-time money that's been given to us by the state, are there any restrictions to the spending of that money? Do we need to spend that within a certain period of time?
It's completely discretionary.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Clark. Any other questions, trustees? Any members of the community that would like to speak up on this issue? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Clark.
Thank you.
I have a comment.
Sure.
And Dr. Clark, I'd appreciate it if you maybe could add something to this. So we've all been getting updates from the California School Boards Association and other sources about the status of the reserve cap bill. And do you want to be the one to describe to everyone here the well, and
spotlight's on you.
Okay. Well, and Jose, you've been sending stuff out about that too. It looks like, after all the lots of work by Senator Hill and Glazer and Senator O'Connell, that they've come together on an agreement for a softening of the reserve cap bill that had been in effect for ever since Proposition 2 was passed. And something that is directly relevant to us is basic aid districts such as ours, since we are a basic aid district, will have no reserve cap anymore. So, we've been watching the, your presentations with, where's the reserve cap and or the reserve, and I always watch that. But it's nice to know, my comment is that it's nice to know that local boards now, like ours, will have local control and flexibility about, the reserve caps, and other districts around the county, the state, small school districts are having their reserve cap abolished, and other school districts are having it changed from, it had been 2 to 6%, it's being changed to 10%. The only thing left on this is to get a signature from the governor, so it ain't over till it's over, but all signs are looking like this is going to happen, so it's good news, I think.
Oh, I would totally agree, but I'm skeptical until it's signed.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm hopeful, but we'll wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Leader. Thank you, Dr. Clark. Thank you. Moving on to the after-school programs audit report. Kathy.
So tonight I'm here to share with you some overall findings of the after-school programming report and audit that was done last year. I do want to thank, even though she's not with us anymore, Angela Lyon did conduct the audit. And I also, in your packet, shared with you the details, the more specific details of the audit so that you had them. So to begin, this audit is based on, doing this audit was based on our strategic plan. We want to eliminate the achievement gap. We want to make sure that students have access to consistent and equitable programs. And as a piece of that in 16-17, the action was to assess what learning opportunities or extended day opportunities that we're providing across the district for our students. When we looked at this, we looked at the type and purpose of each program, when the programs were offered, before or after school. We looked at the target students, who are we looking at to support, and then program costs and who is responsible for each of those costs. So overall at our middle schools, what we see is that we have a primary focus on our athletics and our enrichment. They're co-funded by both the site, and we get a generous donation from MVEF every year to help support those things. Crittenden also has a variety of programs, including Beyond the Bell, which we'll talk about a little bit later. They offer a homework club. They're home to the Peninsula Bridge Academy, which I do want to say supports students from both Graham and Crittenden. Through Peninsula Bridge, they do provide transportation from Graham to Crittenden. They have math and ELD tutors, and then they have what they call the GEM program, Girls Exploring Math, which is offered through A-Learn. Graham has The Beat, which is an after-school program that's sponsored by the City of Mountain View Recreation Department. They have their own style of homework club and homework support. And then they had their Tuesday tutorials last year, where they were supporting the students of parents that were participating in our parent education opportunities. For elementary, all of our elementary schools offer some level of after-school programming, whether it's academic or enrichment or both, but there's a wide range of what happens across our schools. The majority do provide some sort of enrichment, but we do have sites that also offer academic supports. And sometimes these supports, in the cases of Castro and Montaloma and Theragoff, are in addition to Beyond the Bell, which is also enrichment, recreation, and homework support. And we did have 3 schools last year that offered a Lexia Lab. Lexia is an online reading program, and they offered that by opening their computer labs or a classroom with Chromebooks before school for students to come in and work, because it's leveled to the students' level. We wanted to highlight Bub, Mistral, and Stevenson because they provided pretty comprehensive enrichment programs for their students that either targeted all students or grade levels or the entire site. And you can see that these schools got support to offer these programs for kids either 4 or 5 days a week, with a lot of the costs being sponsored through their PTA. And then you have Stevenson with Pack Pals, which was a variety of enrichment activities, but there was a fee for some of our participating families there. Beyond the Bell is at 5 sites, and a little history. Beyond the Bell came about in 2006, 2007. It's a grant that we received through the state. And the schools that received this grant were identified because they had, at the time, 50% free and reduced lunch counts. Most of our schools, or some of our schools that are still in the program, Landals and Montaloma specifically, have dropped below that level, but they're grandfathered in because they were part of it when the grant came. Beyond the Bell serves students that need academic support, but it prioritizes students that are socioeconomically disadvantaged. We also partner with the City of Mountain View Recreation Department for Beyond the Bell, so students get homework support, recreation, enrichment, and then they also have snack and supper. They're there from 3 to 6 in the afternoon, 5 days a week. And you can see the grant covers a majority of it, but the City of Mountain View and our district contribute to make that program run. And currently, or last year, we had approximately 320 kids across those sites that were involved in that program. We do have YMCA. YMCA is fee based on a sliding scale at some of our schools for before and after school childcare. So, next steps. So our strategic plan says this is a planning year for programming. And so what we're trying to do this year is determine what are our goals for after school programming? Where do we want to go from here? Do we want the district to have uniformity in their after school programs? Is that something that we should explore? Or do we want to continue with what we're doing currently, which is allowing schools to make decisions based on the needs of their students, their families, and their site? And based on some direction, we're asking for tonight some direction, then we can go ahead and we can come back and bring back information, and we could make recommendations for 18-19.
Trustees, any questions? We'll do a question, open up to the public for comments, then we'll come back to the trustees for discussion/questions.
Absolutely.
Would anyone like to start? Nope. For questions.
I'll ask a question. Ms. Bauer, to what extent would you be interested in the board's direction on budget, like whether we should stay at the same amount of spending on this program or reduce it or increase it, in addition to the question you mentioned already?
Well, I think we need some direction. I mean, I kind of base thinking about after school on Beyond the Bell because I'm most familiar with that. So I think about for 5 sites for 320 kids, it costs us in the neighborhood of $750,000 to run that. So I think we would need a little bit of direction around funding because depending on what you want us to do, we could get really expensive or not.
And I would say, I think the ultimate question here is if it is the interest of the board to have a uniform program for all kids across all of our sites, then that direction allows us to start exploring what the options are. And then we can also come back with sort of budget recommendations and impacts of those particular types of programs. It's, I was over at Castro and Mistral today I based my office out of there. And Mistral has a program where parents have the opportunity to pay, right? And so it's a little bit different than what you may have at Therakoff, which has Beyond the Bell. And so if the goal is uniformity to make sure all kids have similar offerings, then I think which eventually will be applied to Slater, then what we would do is look at what types of things we could have, because currently we're sort of piecemealing this across the board. And we do pay schools extended day funds, but it's not going to be enough to cover a larger program.
I also was interested in two things. One is, have we done any kind of analysis of educational outcomes, or, even climate surveys about how students and families feel about the existing programs, and has that correlated to student performance, in school? And then also, have we done surveys? Because I would think that the survey information, both from staff on site as well as kids participating in the programs as well as families, would be helpful to inform what decision we make.
We've done a little bit of surveying. We've asked questions about after-school programming and what kinds of programs parents would like to see. Excuse me, through the LCAP. We don't get we got 1,500 responses. A little hard to judge. We have not surveyed each individual program and each individual site. So I don't have data on whether or not what parents feel or how parents feel about how things are going at sites. That's something I could research with the principals to find out if they've given surveys and to see if they have data on that.
I'd also be interested in what, the teachers and the staff on site, just kind of what everybody thinks about it. I know in reading the newsletters that we get from all the schools, each school does have its own kind of menu of options. And at some schools, it seems like it's a little bit more coordinated. Perhaps that's where the PTAs have a little more money.
Yes.
But I don't know how I feel about a one-size-fits-all program, but there's got to be some kind of parity if the district is going to support it. And I don't know if that's in terms of the content or in terms of the funding and delegating decision-making to the sites themselves. But I would be, interested in the data. How does it improve school climate, and how does it improve student performance, and what would the options be?
Okay.
Well, and I had asked that question for people who don't know the practice of the board. We ask questions in written form before the board meeting to get answers. A question I had submitted was, here's these homework clubs, that kind of thing. How effective are they? Do they improve student comfort level in their classes? Do they improve student test scores? That kind of thing. So when you talk about surveys, that's the kind of information I would be interested in, or I don't want to do something just to do it. I'd want to see that it's either helping the social and emotional health of the child or the school, or improving their academic performance.
Yeah, I agree with trustees Blakely and Wheeler. I tried to wade through some of the numbers and had a really challenging time figuring out. I figured out like total number of programs by school, and you can definitely see there's 19 at Graham, 19 I think at Montaloma, and 19 at Stevenson. Those are the top ones, and then it goes all the way down to 11 at Castro. And then the fee-based are kind of comparable. The more programs, the more they're fee-based, meaning the more people who are likely socioeconomically advantaged and able to access these resources. So I think having the types of data that you both have mentioned would let us know, are these effective? And if so, I'd like to see it perhaps be a financial parity, not necessarily programmatic, where if these programs are successful, but certain schools, because they're fee-based and they can pay the fees, have them, maybe we can put more financial resources behind the other schools who have less to offer currently.
Okay.
I agree, but I think you have to look at it both. You have to look at it from a couple of perspectives in addition to that, right? When you look at the breakdown of what programs have been offered in general at each school site, they vary. There's some commonality, but not much. So I think the bigger question that we should look at or think about as well is, what can we bring in common to the district as a whole? Which of these programs that you see here offered at different school sites are maybe the most popular ones, the ones that are most in demand? How do they tie into what we're teaching in the school site? Legos or robotics ties into math. What do we have for STEM? What do we have for what do we have for other programs? English language, they bring up the issue of Lexia, but that's also not necessarily a reading program. It's also catch up for for students who we want to reclassify. And so that's a little bit different. The Mistral principle is here. Maybe perhaps you can clarify that, because I didn't look at Lexia as an after-school reading program or before-school reading program. I understood that to be something more of an intervention program, where we would have more time dedicated for students so that we can bring them up to par, have them take the test, and hopefully reclassify sooner rather than later. So where I'm going with all this is that when you see the disparity you have within the schools because of the money, the PTA volunteer money that's given to the programs, you see a difference, like you mentioned, Trustee Wilson, of those PTAs that can contribute a little bit more compared to those that can't. And if we're thinking about the strategic plan, then the question now that we have to ponder and that we have the help of the executive team to explore is, out of all these that are here, would you all be able to figure out, working with the school sites themselves, which ones are the programs that are most popular, and how do they tie in with educational growth and experience or academic results? I don't know that you could, but I think there's something there that you can start with, so that when you do come back and we take this into another level of conversation, we can see more or less what the perspective really is at the high level and how much money we're looking at to spend at the same time. Because if we can augment what we have here, like it's been brought up, I think that would help out a lot, because we still expect for the PTAs possibly to help out one way or another. It just depends on what we're looking at to spend the money on. And also the resources available, because I think some of these programs, if I remember correctly, they're stretched out thin. So like the robotics class, I think it was wanted at a certain school, but it wasn't able to be offered there because all the teachers that they had for that class were at Mistral, Castro, and somewhere else. And so they couldn't offer it at that other school. And when you look at in that type of detail, that's a lot of work to go through, right? To find out the who's, what's, when's, and how much.
Well, and I think we're able to answer. I think you asked a question in there about, getting more information. What are most popular? What are the ties to student achievement? I think that we can go back. This was just a first step, and I think we could go back and spend some time with our principals, whether that be surveys, and with our staff to get more information about the actual programs, what's effective, what's not, what's most popular, what do we want to see.
Sure. And I like just to quickly add in, please, with BTB, you hear a lot of like, oh yeah, this is a great program. I hear a little bit, I hear something different. I hear that it's a little chaotic. It can get a little, it's not so well organized. And so therefore the quality of whatever they're getting there at that time, that could be questionable. So I think we have to look at these programs a little bit more, because even though we have partnerships with other entities, that may not necessarily be the right fit. Madam Wilson?
Are we still in question or comment?
We're in question mode.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not a question.
Okay. Any members of the, if there are no other questions from the board members, any members of the community that would like to speak to this issue? Ms. Livnot? And if you could please fill out the form once you're done with your opinion. That would greatly be appreciated.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sarah Livnot, and I have a child at Mistral and one at Graham. So a couple points. First, just to clarify, the Mistral program, which is a very comprehensive program run over 3 trimesters, is actually totally donation-based. And it's somewhat subsidized by the PTA, but it's done in a way so that all families have access. But I do want to point out, just because you provide access doesn't mean everybody actually gets access, because there's a whole registration process, and that can be harder for some families than others, just to kind of get all their paperwork in. And it's an immense amount of work. And I would say that if you were to, let's say, create programs across the schools, I think that would be fantastic, because there's a lot of work being done at each site by volunteer parents, and you're not getting necessarily the consistency and the quality over the years, right? Those parents kind of graduate on when their kids graduate, and that know-how is not kept anywhere. It's just lost if it's not passed on. The other is that the district could be more supportive in putting together those classes. We actually had a few classes that didn't make it last year because the district did not do the proper paperwork in time. So the district needs to actually review every single class and contract before it's allowed to go through. And we had to essentially cancel a couple classes because it didn't make it in time. So I just want to point that out. I know everybody's trying hard, but it does impact the kids. And then finally, I think in terms of after school, Talking to parents, particularly parents of low socioeconomic at both Mistral and Castro, but particularly Mistral, they lost their B2B program, and those parents were really upset about that. I think it was one of the kind of unintended or unknown consequences of the split of the two schools. And we really want to bring it back, but the PTA can't afford it because it's actually quite expensive. And yet there's a B2B program happening at Castro, which is the same campus. And so those parents are, it's a significant number of parents. And the YMCA, despite the fact that we try to help parents fill out apps to be able to get some of the lower cost enrollment into the YMCA program, it's oversubscribed. And the enrollment process or the application process for financial aid requires a lot of documentation that our low socioeconomic families can't provide. So there is definitely a lack of equity and a lot of hardship on those families who had a BTB program and kind of secure childcare after school and now don't have anything.
Thank you, Ms. Levnant. Members of the board, discussion? Who would like to begin?
Well, I'll say something because I haven't added much so far. I agree with, it sounds like the tenor of the comments here that I want more equitable regarding price and cost among all the schools. Some of our schools have more money, some have less money. I don't think because you go to a school that has parents that don't have as much money, you shouldn't be able to have as many or as good classes. So however we can address that, I would like us to address it. I wouldn't want, when you're saying, should we have uniform programs, I'm reluctant to have that requirement because I know that each school is different and they're creative. I don't know, maybe some sort of understanding that there's a base level of programs or classes or something that each school could have, and then, an option for individual school creativity. I don't know, but I wouldn't want the district to come in and say you have to do this if the school doesn't want to do it. But and I agree with the previous commenter that maybe one basis of uniform programs would be more explicit district support or understanding by the programs or the schools that they're not going to have to be on their own.
So I agree with you. I don't think we need to get into the minutia of what specific programs should be applied at each school. I trust our principals to know what's best for the kids and the teachers themselves. But I do think some more equity in terms of financing should be something we could potentially explore. I noticed in looking through some of the numbers, Huff has actually 6 in-school enrichment programs sponsored entirely by the PTA. And I kind of group things by PTA sponsor and fee-based, assuming people who are donating to the PTA are also likely to be able to pay a fee when I threw my numbers together here. So it would be kind of interesting to see what are the returns on that and how maybe we could offer even in-school enrichment. If that's an option we could potentially explore, I'd be interested in that. I think it's the only school that had that, I might add.
Well, I think, as Sarah pointed out, it's hard especially for socioeconomically disadvantaged families to find reliable kind of childcare after school, but it's hard for every family to do that where parents work. This is not that many families have a stay-at-home parent anymore. And so it is harder in the schools that have like an oversubscribed YMCA program for families to find something to do. So I'd like the idea of making sure that there's something available at each site for the families that want to participate. In terms of qualifying for support, we already do the free and reduced lunch program. It does seem kind of difficult that like the YMCA or another provider might require a lot more documentation. It seems if there's a way to streamline some of that, that might be helpful for some families. I do like having some consistent programming. I think every school should probably have some kind of a homework support program, and it may be that that's a component of programs, because there's always going to be kids that need that. And when you have two working parents, sometimes it is harder to fit that into your evening when you're trying to get dinner and baths and kids to bed on time. So it is nice to have that option available. I think every school, one of the commonalities is every school does have a choir. Every elementary school has an after-school choir. And I know, having gone to many of those Shoreline concerts, the choirs vary in size, but there are always kids that really enjoy singing and participating in that. And I think that feeds into the strong music program that we have at both of our middle schools. And then that feeds into the strong music programs that we have at our local high schools. And so I would really like to have that continue. But another, it might be possible if we were going to do some kind of standardized programming and some other programming to have a wheel component like you do in some of those elective offerings at the middle schools, where the kids aren't going to just take band. They'll have like maybe art for 10 weeks and I don't know what all we're doing in those wheel programs, but have some options. And so like there could be a Lego option, and there could be an art option, there could be a foreign language option. I'm just tossing things out. And if there's impacts, it sounds like from what Jose was saying, where everybody wanted Legos and the Lego provider was oversubscribed, trying to have a wheel notion might help, because it could be that you do it at these 3 elementary schools for this 8-week period, and then it would move to the next 3, so that you could mix it up a little bit, and that might help with some scheduling for the really popular programs. So just some ideas.
Thank you. I think it's great that individual school communities try to respond to the interests of the students and the families at their schools and have different things. I would not want to stop that, and I don't want every school to have exactly the same stuff. I don't want this, once, to use Laura's phrase, like one size fits all doesn't sound very good to me. I think it's fine to have different things. When I pull up the strategic plan, strategy number 1.2 is students will be engaged in personalized learning experiences. So I'd encourage staff to, I can't remember which trustee was talking about it, I'd like to know which of the programs we do after school best support student achievement and closing the achievement gap, and invest as much in those programs as we can afford to. So different schools, I think it's great that they have all sorts of different programs, but what I'd like to see the district spending most of its effort on is helping the students that are learning English or that are below grade level, learning, having fun, enjoying being at school after dismissal, but learning at the same time, as much as we can afford to do that. And so strategic goal, or strategy number 1.3, implement a multi-tiered system of support that intervenes early and often to meet the needs of all students. I personally think that the after-school programs that the district pushes should try to do that as best as we can for all the students that need support at all the different sites. And not just 1 or 2 sites, but at every site that there are students that have different sorts of needs, but definitely at the sites that have lots of students that have similar needs.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, trustees. And along that line of thinking, when you look at it from that perspective, then you have a great starting point, because now you can do the in-depth analysis and figure out what ties to what and what results can we get from that, and how much money would be needed from the district to be able to augment what's already there. Because I think the key point here is that we all want our students to succeed, but we also realize that many of our schools are limited by various circumstances. So whatever we can do to try and bridge that gap, that would always help. And I like this starting point for the conversation, because I think as we move forward with it, then we'll get more insight from you all as to what this may look like and how much it could cost, and what the expected relationship will be with the PTAs and the school sites themselves, and in terms of their expectations and their perspectives too. Because like we all mentioned here, we notice that each school site has its own ambiance, and we don't want to deter from that creativity. I'd like to stress though that I do like an emphasis on the arts, right? Music, dance, exercise, but also what's been echoed before, and what I've mentioned this since I got on, some sort of tutorial center at the elementary school level, not necessarily 5 days a week or 4, but at least 3, Monday, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, something like that, to help out the parents that do need the help, because they're the ones, well, certain types of parents of certain types of students, those are the parents that come to me and say, why don't we have this? This is what we need. So if we could just listen to the concerns and go from here, I think that's a good start. So thank you, trustees. Dr. Rudolph, I think
I
you
just
wanna-
I just want to do some, we talked about this last night about expectation setting.
Yeah.
We're not comparing apples to apples. Beyond the Bell has a very specific guideline about the types of kids that can qualify and that can be in it, which is why we run that program. The YMCA is a private program that we offer space at, and they pay rent. That's something different. The PTAs, from year to year, their programs differ because of the parents or the volunteers that they can get in. So I hope you're not expecting for us to be able to really do some type of data analysis on programs that really are not similar. Newton at Stevenson versus dance at Mistral versus Beyond the Bell at Montaloma. That's a real hard task to get. And I think, to clarify what Kathy's asking is, if the interest is to make sure that we have some type of after-school programming, uniform to us means not the program itself, but if the direction is that, yes, we want to have extended day, we can look at funding models, we can look at programs that make it uniform, even if that means that we increase the amount of contributions at every single site, and we base it based off of a number of unduplicated kids. But what you're asking, at least what I'm hearing, what you're asking us to do is a very deep data dive in programs that are and are not ran by the district. And they're not similar programs at all. And I just don't want you to think that we're going to be able, when we do our summer programs, the reason why we have data on that is because the outside providers are actually the ones who provide us, and then we can compare the CAF scores to it. This isn't the same thing for the programs that are running around and the hundreds of kids that have signed up at different things. So we're simply asking, is the board's direction for us to find a way to make sure that every school has some type of after-school program? And if so, then we can go back and look at, does that mean we increase funding? Do we increase programming on our end? Do we do other things? Because you're asking a very tall order to do this type of analysis.
I'm sorry, I thought that's what we were talking about.
Yeah, let me jump in. Dr. Rudolph, who asked the question that you're responding to? Did I do it?
You guys just said you want a data analysis of whether or not this actually has an impact on educational outcomes.
Well, I don't think it's unreasonable to want to know which of the programs have positive educational impacts, is it?
Because they may not. It may be.
To me, that
something
seems
different.
like the sort of thing the board should want to know.
But we don't run. So we'll take Mistral. So it's a parent-based program. Year to year, the programs may change. Enrollment may change based off of, right? It's not like the Beyond the Bell program where we know we have a director, we know who the kids are, the enrollment is stable, right? The data analysis there is different than asking, because what will happen, so we'll just take Mistral. We will have to go to Marcella. We'll have to ask Marcella to pull all the kids. We'll then have to ask Tara to look at all the data for all those kids. We'll have to try to figure out a way to do some type of analysis, depending on what grade level the kids are in. And then we'll have to do that for every single site. And then we're going to bring you back data, but those kids may not be in Newton this year. They may not be in dance this year. So for us to be able to predict whether or not a dance program that shows up 1 or 2 years has a statistical impact or some type of impact on educational outcomes versus Beyond the Bell, which has a different stable population, that's a very tall order to ask. So what I'm saying is, I believe we can do this for the district-run programs. I think it's a harder task to do this for PTA-run programs that we don't really have much involvement in.
And I think that describes the inequity that we find in the programs offered as a whole in the schools. Therefore, that's why we're asking to try and figure out, with your help, how is it that we get to that point to figure out what kind of direction to give to you?
I guess I maybe was confused by the question. I mean, it says, should the district create uniform programs at each site or continue with current programming and funding? And I guess my interest is that we have programming at each school. The uniformity, I don't know so much. I hear what you're saying, that to try and delve down and look at each kid and educational outcomes will be a challenge. I do think it might be helpful to have some kind of survey data, and it could even be just interviews with the site administrators at each site, but about what programming works and what doesn't. But I think part of it also, you've got the academic piece and the student success piece, but it's also school climate and kids being engaged and wanting to be at school. So, I don't feel like elementary school kids should be hitting the books, from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. I mean, I think it's very helpful to have some of these more enrichment type programs, and I'd like to make sure we have them in each school. I think we do have them in each school, but I do think we should have something at each school. And so I'm not really sure, maybe I just misunderstood what the question is, what you were looking for.
Well, because in that case, we all misunderstood. Right?
I think when we're saying uniform, we're saying we acknowledge that Montaloma has Beyond the Belt.
Mm-hmm.
We also acknowledge that Mistral doesn't have Beyond the Belt. So uniform in our mind is, do you want the district to offer a program at sites that don't have it? Do you want us to increase the offerings at sites that do have it? And if so, that's uniformity, right? The district offers a program. Not the district tells the PTA, you're going to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
But just that there's uniformity, that every single site has an after-school program that can reach whatever the goals are, whether it's homework help or something else. That's uniformity, not program uniformity, just uniformity that the district says, yes, we as a district have an interest in after-school enrichment, after-school programming. Our goal is to make sure that there is a program at every single site that is paid for by the district and that is run in some type of capacity, and that is in addition to the private programs that are currently at sites, YMCA, Newton, because I believe at Stevenson, they don't even have a district ran program. It's just completely Newton. So if the goal is to have uniformity at all sites, meaning the district offers programs at every single site, then that's the type of uniformity we're talking about, not the uniformity about the program offerings and what each PTA does based off of the interests of their current population that year and what the parents bring in.
Okay, fair enough. So I think the follow-up questions that should also have been presented then would be, in this case, because we have something that we can measure standards by, like a BTB, what are the alternatives? And how successful has been BTB? And how much does it cost? And when does the money run out? And do each school sites have the ability to offer that? And if not, why not? And if there's some other limitation, what are they? I think that's a starting point.
For BTB.
Yes.
Okay.
Or any other program that Dr. Rudolph mentioned where you can get standards from or data from, because he's making the distinction between those types of programs where you have something there on a year-by-year basis and you could possibly get some sort of result of whether or not it ties into academic success, compared to like a yoga class that's offered at Mistral, where you can't, right? Because that's a given, right? You can't. What we're hearing is you can't measure that in academic performance, which I agree. But at the same time, you can't expect the board to give you direction without more information. And this is a give and take, which is fine because this is how we move forward. But speaking frankly, this conversation, I'm glad it's going this way because now we're getting to the meat of it. There are discrepancies. There's lack of funding. Absolutely. There's no equity. It's part of the strategic plan. Well, this is how we get things done. How do we figure this out in uniform steps?
I'm just going to go on the record saying I do think there should be a BTB-like or some kind of a homework support offering at each school where there is a demonstrated need for it. And it sounds like perhaps at Mistral there's a significant enough community that we should make that available on a district basis. What exact form it takes, that I'm not sure.
And it sounds to me, and I took a lot of notes, but it sounds to me like I heard that there's a want for academic support, enrichment support, and enrichment after school and options for families that crosses the board, but that there's flexibility in what that may look like depending on the site. And so I think that gives us enough to move forward to then do some research, look at our programs, and bring more information back.
And I trust that if you or Dr. Rudolph or any member of the team come to that point where it just becomes overwhelming, you will let us know immediately, because we don't want you to spend 300 hours in a month to figure this out.
Well, thank you. But I think I heard. I think I have enough at least to take next steps, and I will definitely ask questions if I am confused.
Thank you so much,
And
trustees.
I,
Madam
for one,
Wilson?
would really welcome any recommendations you would have once you go through all of that information and do some more research on this. I think as the board, we value your input on recommendations as well. So that would be helpful to me. To us. Okay.
I want to respond to Dr. Rudolph's point that it would be difficult if the ask was to like find out the academic result effect of every single program. I didn't mean to ask for that, if that's what it sounded like I was asking. Like, I'm looking at the Stevenson list. We don't need to see if the basketball club or the chess club or the Hindi club are tying into advanced, CASP scores. But I would like to know which of the programs we do that can help students who are, far below basic in state standards, that staff thinks that if the board put more money into them, we could lift students from there to state standards. And I'd like to see that done with all deliberate speed. And I don't know which of the different programs we have now or could have, but we don't. And so I'd be interested in that, but not boiling the ocean and like looking at every possible thing the kids do, but the ones that we expect have that type of result and see if they do. If we have students in them and we can measure them, or we can look at the ones in it and not in it and see if some gained and didn't. I'd value that and want to put as much weight behind the arrow of any program that has a big effect. That'd be as one of five, that'd be my interest.
No, and I agree with you on that, Greg, because when you look at the list here, the one that comes to mind for that particularly would be Lexia. Principal Semoes de Carvalho.
On the spot.
Could you please just give us a quick, well, he can wait. Honorable Nelson's patient enough. He's patient enough. Could just a quick 2-minute synopsis of what Lexia is all about.
My son does Lexia.
Yes. And your intervention programs for reclassifying students. So whatever teacher Jenna does or teacher Shannon, if you could please let us know what that looks like. And this is a board request from me, the president. So it's a quick.
I was just looking at my boss.
You can't.
I was looking
deny.
at my boss. So, okay. So Lexia at our school is an after-school computer lab, and we have instructional aides and a teacher partnered in this lab time, and students who are either English language learners or reclassified language learners who did not meet district benchmark that need extra English instruction in the area of phonics, basic reading comprehension, some spelling, those discrete skills. They participate in this class, and the teacher that's qualified to interpret those reports will do small group instruction to follow up and support the online learning. And it peaks out after a certain skill level or grade level. So we had one student who was on the cusp of reclassifying last year as a 4th grader, and he finished the entire program within like 3 weeks. He ended up reclassifying, doing quite well on the SBAC exam as well. And so we use it at our school as an extension of English language arts, and that's because of our dual language program. We know that we need to fill some gaps that we're not able to do during the regular school day because sometimes kids need more time, and so we offer that more time after school.
Thank you.
I'm sold.
Thank you.
President Gutierrez.
That's just one example. I only brought that up as an example so that we can figure out what, to your questions,
Yes.
what does this look like? What could it look like? And what can we do? Thank you, everyone. Unless anyone else has any questions or discussion points. Okay. Thank you. Enrollment update. Review and discussion. Ms. Robinson.
And President Gutierrez, since this conversation went so long, I think after this presentation, I'm going to want to take a quick bio break.
How about before?
Before would be fine.
Would you
too.
mind
Are
if we took a
fine?
quick break?
Absolutely not.
Thank you much. We will adjourn the meeting now at, let's see, 9:15 p.m. We will take a 5-minute break. Thank you, everyone.
Lexia sounds pretty good. Keep pushing.
Good idea. You know, I bet you could freeze these
So who is
too.
going to be willing to eat the key lime one? Is that
I'm gonna
you?
try it, yeah.
Okay. No, it looks good. I mean,
I know there is chocolate. I know. I'm settling.
You can have chocolate and lime.
Yeah, exactly. Mix it.
I love key lime. I don't know if I'd like cupcakes, but
I like sweet
I had two
and tart.
cookies last night. That's enough sweets for me.
so I've been getting these Draeger's coupons. Have you been getting those in the mail? To pin? So you get free mini pie. So of course I buy three, one for me, one for Nathan, one for Owen. They had a mini key lime pie.
Whoa. Yeah.
I'm going to a goodbye party for a family that's moving this weekend, and I was asked to bring. Apparently, the husband's favorite thing was the Peninsula Creamery's key lime pie. So I just ordered 2 of those today. That was my. Because I was prepared to bake, and I've got some good, and they're like, let's get it. Okay.
Yeah.
This I can do.
I just love the
We're
sweet and the
talking about
tart.
key
Like,
lime pie,
I made
Kathy.
I'm just hacking up. I know, my dealer. Just turn this off. Thank you. I have a no-bake lemon pie. It's
A
so
what?
good. It's a no-bake lemon pie. You just,
Really?
yeah,
How do you do it?
Starch. You whip it up with either fresh squeeze or bottled lemon juice. I think it's got condensed milk in it.
Of course it does.
So good. It's fast. Like I go to my
And then you
sister's,
put
she's
it
got-
in a crust?
Yeah, I did in a pre-made like graham, or if you can make your own graham pretzel.
So the cornstarch, you don't like whipped cream or something in it.
You do it on the stove top, so it thickens.
So it's kind of so it's like a what do you call it? A
custard
lemon
tart.
curd.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. And if you put a little bit of lemon rind in it, you grate any lemon rind in
with the
there.
little zester.
Yeah. Zest in it, yeah.
One of the things that's so funny when you get around women, everybody has the little tips about all
That's right. Are we on?
We're behind, I think. Well, I don't know. No.
What?
We,
No, we're way behind.
now I got his eye down right now. You sent for cupcake. Wash it down with a cupcake.
Ruin the place. This is rare that ladies are going first.
Well, Jose went and he was chatting and then he stepped out. Did he? He might have stepped out with Sarah. They may be talking. No, Sarah's right here. She's really trying to convince to run for school board. What? I'm trying to convince Sarah to run for school board. And now, when I'm up, or now,
He gets really offended when he's not invited.
Is that good?
I haven't tried it yet. I'm like,
It was too good. I had one.
productive.
yeah.
Awesome. Sounds like he already had this pencil. Yeah. I think I don't know. He's got 4 kids, 3. One's really good. I think that's somewhere I got like.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see who runs for. I'm encouraging Lucas to run again in 3 years for city council. Who's going to run? And I think he'll win. who's going to run for the other spot. So, you know, it's like that very long, but there's two open, two non-incumbent. He's trying to get not to please. Yeah, no, he did sign up. Oh, he did? Oh, good. Yeah. I'm so glad. Because I told him about it. And yeah. Like, oh. I encouraged him to do it. Oh, good.
The time is 9:25. We will now reconvene our meeting of the Mount Mead Wisconsin School Board District Board of Trustees. Ms. Robinson, you have the floor. Thank you so much for your time and your patience.
Well, thank you. This is our beginning of the year enrollment update. We try to give you the same kind of information every year so you can see what's going on with district enrollment. In the interest of the next presentation, I'm going to keep this as short as you want it to be. You have all the information. Our enrollment is pretty steady, actually. If you look at the trends in the grade levels, they go up and down. But if you look at just overall, our enrollment is pretty steady, and it's right in line, right in the, between the conservative and moderate projections from the demographers. So I think the biggest changes that made some impact this year, I'll just say, were second grade. And we ended up moving children back to Huff and creating a second, third grade combo in order to have them be in their neighborhood school, because second grade was so huge across the district. That helped all the other schools have room for their neighborhood kids too. Eighth grade is also up quite a bit, and there are no big trends that I can see. It's up and down in different grade levels. Kindergarten's down a little bit this year, but that's not a trend. It's the first year that we've seen that, and next year could change completely. I don't have any information beyond that or wisdom because I don't see patterns. I've looked. So our enrollment is stable. It's just changes within the grade levels. At the sites, we do have changes at some of the sites. If you look at Montaloma and you look at Therkoff, Montaloma has bigger changes than Therkoff, but some of the changes were because we took second and third graders out of Montaloma who were already in the projections from last year, or not projections, but the enrollment for last year. So that changed some of the schools so that Huff became bigger. We also added the kinder classes at Huff and at Bub, so that changed Huff to be bigger. So again, we moved children around, but our actual enrollment is pretty stable. We tried not to move too many children too far. Every year you ask about the requested transfer wait list. This is as of last week, the wait lists that were still in place. And that could have changed. It changes, enrollment changes every day. But as of last week, that's where we were with which students wanted to go where, and they're still waiting. So, however, in our attempts to, is this going now? Okay. In our attempts to reduce the wait lists, we did surveys, and we probably bothered people all year long. Are you really coming? Are you really going to attend? Even with all that, the weekend before school started, people called the schools and let them know they weren't attending. So that was a little bit frustrating, but I guess it's better to know. So we had quite a bit of movement over the summer to let people get into the schools that they requested or back into their neighborhood schools. But as you could see by the wait list, we didn't quite get there for everyone. And on the next page, our class sizes are very good this year. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. They are much lower this year in the K3, which is good, but we will be working on staffing more tightly as our budget shrinks, or if it shrinks. We'll see what happens. The the higher levels at Stevenson in the 4th and 5th grade did change a little bit. They're down to 31 or 32. And that's the same at Huff and Bub as well. They're a little bit higher than some of the other 4th and 5th grade classes. So if we were doing the state mandated K3 average this year for 24-1 in K3, we would make it. So this is good. We're practicing for next year when it's real. 24-1 will make a big difference in funding for us. So the next thing we need to know, though, is that as we look at staffing for next year, we can see definite pockets of grade levels that might end up with more combo classes. You need to know that to be fiscally responsible in staffing, that we may have to make more decisions like that, but that we will come to you if we need that. And the next big thing for enrollment is the Enrollment Priorities Task Force and making the changes as we open Slater. Next year will be the last year that Slater won't be open. So it'll be an interesting thing to get all the students into the schools that we have, but then when Slater opens, if we do it right, it should alleviate a lot of the pressure and the enrollment impacts. Any questions?
Are the numbers beginning to settle out? I know oftentimes in the beginning of each school year, they fluctuate wildly from week to week. And at some point, 4 or 5 weeks in, they start settling out and are more static.
They do settle, but between the end of open enrollment in January, so from February to December last school year, we enrolled 675 kids in the district. That's not the enrollment, so people move in and out of California a lot, but our numbers stay pretty much the same. I don't even know how that works, but it's just been true in the time that I've been doing this. It may go up 50 kids, down 50 kids, but there aren't this huge changes in the numbers. There are big changes in which kids are in our schools.
Any other questions, trustees?
Yeah, I have a question. Ms. Robinson, we'll talk about this when we do enrollments and enrollment priorities and stuff, but some of the more popular schools have the highest ratios. Like, let's look at Huff, K3 is 23, north of 23. Stevenson is like at the max across, maybe 12 classrooms, must all be 24 students in them. Would it be part of the enrollment policies discussion to discuss whether we think it's best to allow transfers up until we reach the maximum, or whether we should have a policy of keeping a buffer or something, so that if a class, let's say hypothetically, let's say we didn't let anybody do an intra-district transfer into a school, if it would mean the ratio, the student-teacher ratio goes above 22. But because I think it's nice to have slightly smaller classes, but people are moving in all the time, and I don't want the people that move here in September to be, told that their school is several miles away, because we let other people take the last seats. It doesn't allow us any flexibility as the year goes on. So like Mistral, I don't know if it applies as much. Huff, I would think it applies. Huff 4th through 5th grade, and Stevenson. I wouldn't mind if we, by policy, didn't fill them as much as we can.
So let me answer for Stevenson and Mistral. Those are on lottery wait lists. Mm-hmm. So if they come in later, I'm
sorry.
There's no way they get in. So we do keep them full. We move people in as much as we can, I think up till January for Stevenson and Mistral. Now, the waiting list for the other schools technically end at the end of September, but we often still offer them. However, at the impacted schools, they're neighborhood kids. So they're the neighborhood kids who are on the wait list. We don't put requested wait lists into the impacted schools at all at this point. So if you're
So-
moving in later, if we've moved somebody in, they're already a neighborhood student.
So then, the fact that there are neighborhood students on the wait list for the neighborhood school, to me, speaks to the logic of not filling the classrooms up at the beginning of the school year. So like,
But you're not filling them with neighborhood kids who are waiting to get in who are in our district already.
well,
And believe me,
For
they talk to
kindergarten.
each other.
yes,
I can tell you they
they talk
count
to us too.
and they let us know
They talk to us
there
too.
are spaces here.
But just because it's when they say there's a space there, is that because they know that the maximum is 24 and there's only 23 and they say, you can go get that last spot?
Yes, and they know who that is and and they talk to each other.
Yeah.
However, we also have to explain to them the K-3 average. You sometimes don't, you have 23 students in a kindergarten class because you have 25 somehow in a first grade class. That's all the math that you have to keep track of. We have a very definite system that we use, so we're not going to make any mistakes next year when it happens that counts for $1 million. One child can in the wrong place at the wrong time. So we do use buffers for the schools that are not impacted. We try to leave room for their neighborhood kids and requested wait lists. But it's a daily balancing. How many students are here? How many students want in? Are they neighborhood? Do they have siblings? Remember the 26 priorities? It's an amazing job that Nubia does.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, trustees? Any members of the public that would like to opine about this issue? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Enrollment Priorities Task Force. Dr. Rudolph.
Do we need to make a motion to extend the time?
How many more items do we have?
This is the last one.
It's 30 minutes and it's 20 till.
What if we just did it in 20 minutes? Dr. Rudolph, how much direction do you want from the board tonight? Or is this mostly informative?
The task force is, the member selection will take place on September 22nd. So the goal is to have the first meeting within the first 3 months of the school year. So we need direction.
On what?
On how you want the task force to function.
So I'm going to move that we allow an extension till 10:30.
Second.
Just, yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, trustees. The floor is yours, Dr. Rudolph. Thank you so much.
All right, so today we're seeking board direction for the Enrollment Priorities Task Force. This is phase 2 of boundary implementation. And so I just want to take us through the timeline again. So currently we're in the September month, so we are getting direction for parameters. I'll talk about parameters in a second. We're also starting to solidify our focus groups. We'll be meeting with DLAC, DAC, as well as PTA presidents pretty soon to get some community feedback. And then DAC and PTA presidents will weigh in on the applicants for each task force. They will do a blind process. Every applicant was notified last night. And then based off of the direction that the board provides in terms of what is the approach that you would like for enrollment priorities, we'll start to do a research and review. Again, we will come back with recommendations. We'll take those to focus groups. And then we'll also bring it back to the board to sort of get your thoughts on it. We'll again engage in a thought exchange process in April with the goal by the end of the year to have recommendations. And again, these recommendations and also the length of the process is really determined on what type of enrollment program you would like the district to offer. So just because you've seen this a couple of times, but I want to talk about where we are for success matrix for the first 3 months. Task force is formed and equally represented. Just for everyone's reference, we are expecting to have one community member from every single boundary, including Slater. So it's the 2019-2020 boundaries. We are expecting one staff member from every single site. And then we also get a representative from the choice schools. And then we also will have a representative from the middle schools. And the middle schools are sort of the wild cards, because you can be a community member and qualify for one of those, which means that the maximum number that one neighborhood could have on the task force would be 3. You could have someone who is, the choice schools will have a choice school parent on it, but the other ones will have community members or parents or people who used to be parents, which means that the maximum number that one community could have is 3. The other part is that we want to make sure that the community is informed about the issue as well as the process. We want to make sure that we have parameters from the board as well as directions. And then we want to make sure that we hold our first meeting. So this is just the approved boundaries from 2019-2020. As you can see, Slater is clearly defined. And this does not include any changes or predicted changes that are going to come as a result of North Bayshore or East Westman. So this is our current boundaries. This is, again, these are refreshers before we jump into it. So we are expecting growth, as you can see, by 2019, and this is only for elementary enrollment. You can see that we are expecting to have an increase of about 200-something kids over the course of the next couple of years. This is a moderate projection, which we use for building. The conservative projection is just a little bit under that, but again, we are expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of about 800 kids total K through 8 in the district. And again, I just want to reiterate that that does not include any additional bills. This is as of February 2017. And we will have an updated study in the coming months when our demographer is completed. So when we started the SAATF and when we looked at the boundary assignment task force, as well as a board task force that worked on communities or the boundaries, what we noticed is that the comment was exactly the same. We want smaller learning communities, somewhere around 450, being a soft target, not a definite number. And then obviously, eventually the board direction became to open Slater, which drove the whole process. And it changed, the opening of Slater changed the function of the Boundary Advisory Task Force. If we look at the difference between the two, the Boundary Advisory Task Force made a recommendation not to open Slater. The board made a recommendation to open Slater. The SAATF's charge was to create boundaries that would open Slater based off of board direction. So part of this is that your direction will drive the process, which is why we have the questions at the end. What we don't want to have happen is that the expectation is that the task force comes up and makes recommendations that go against what the board's direction is. And with that said, I want to show you just real quick, based off of our current enrollment, and this is as of last week, so it's the same data that Karen used a second ago. You can see the schools that are currently over the 450 mark are not really close in striking range. With Huff being our largest elementary school at 608 students, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of, I believe, about 60-something kids smaller than Crittenden Middle School. So our current policy has 26 priorities that guide enrollment. And each priority, we've heard this from parents, determines how things are coming into play. And staff and community feedback is that it is a very complex web. It is extremely hard to execute. And at times it's not transparent and people question whether or not, we had one email from a parent who said they wanted to see the programming code behind the whole system. It works, but it is not the most efficient system. And I think if Mrs. Robinson was up here, she would tell you that Ms. Avina sits there and has to manually put this stuff in to make sure that people qualify, and we want a system that's a little bit better there. Additionally, the current priorities conflict with the goal of creating neighborhood schools. And I'll talk about that in a second. The other issue with this is that there's a lack of understanding about the actual policies by stakeholders. And we get a lot of questions about, well, does this parent, who has more priority? Am I, as a parent who moves into a particular neighborhood, do I have more priority than someone who doesn't live in the neighborhood? Do I have more priority than a teacher who's bringing their child in? So there's a lot of questions that come with this actual process. And then, you know, so if neighborhood schools are the direction, then I highlighted the first priority, which says that if you are enrolled in a particular school, then you get to stay in that school regardless of where you move within the city. So we've heard several times that parents will move into a particular apartment community around Huff to get into the placement, and then they will move out of that in order to be placed at Huff. And so we're trying to combat that and sort of look, but the priority supports the movement, right? So it doesn't support neighborhood schools. It's really an open enrollment policy that the district is currently employing. So let's talk about what our current reality is. So this slide shows you what the current enrollment is versus the actual capacity of the school. So you can see, and I'm going to pick on Huff a little bit. Huff is currently at 608 students. Its maximum capacity is 625. While it seems like you have an extra capacity of 17 students, the reason why I put it at the bottom is that students do not come in perfect grade levels. I think Karen has mentioned this several times. So Huff is currently at capacity. It does not have any additional rooms that it can use unless we start removing programs, which means that we would eliminate the YMCA, we would eliminate RTI, we would eliminate the library, we would move programs out of the building in order to increase. So its maximum school capacity is actually greater, but because we have other programs at that site, it reduces its actual capacity. And what you can see is that Slater is projected enrollment. So this, one thing I will say is that you see the current enrollment for every other site, but you see a projected enrollment for Slater. The reason why there's a projected enrollment is because we didn't pull the numbers. I'm going to show that in a couple minutes. But the projected enrollment has us already over capacity at Slater. But again, we don't know how those kids are going to shape out or what grade level those kids are going to be in. So it's possible that you're at 465, but because the state allows a higher class load in grades 4 and 5, it's possible that you can be at 465, even though you have smaller class sizes. So you can see what our space is at currently at each site. Castro having the highest number of seats with 195, and then Therakoff with 133. So one of the first questions we asked is how many kids would actually be impacted by the boundaries when they are enacted in 2019, 2020. And so we pulled, and I want to say this is only kids who are enrolled as of last year. This is not kid because our system has yet to be updated just yet. So when we update the system, we'll have a more accurate number, but that won't come until October when Decision Insight runs the additional numbers. And part of that is because we're currently doing enrollment, so they can't really pull the information just yet. But if we look at last year's kids and we look at the impact of them, there are 341 students who are going to be impacted by the move in 2019 and 2020. So it's a little bit under 10% of the elementary school population. We have removed out the number of kids who will have matured out of the system and moved into middle school. So these are true kids who are going to be impacted by this number in grades who are currently, I believe, in 1, 2, and 3. So grandfathering also has an impact on Slater. So we took the projected numbers for Slater, and we actually, as part of the board packet, you can see what the transition numbers are. We added all the numbers up, and we had to make some assumptions about some of the sites. So we projected the numbers for K, 1, 2, right, because they're not really there. So if you take that and then you subtract out the choice school students, and you make a lot of assumptions about this, right? So we're assuming a higher kindergarten enrollment because we don't really know what that kindergarten enrollment looks like. We're assuming a higher first grade enrollment based off of what the demographer says, and then we're using real numbers at the end of kids that actually show up. So what we notice is that if you make a lot of assumptions about this, you see that what used to be a 465 student school is now at 487, right? And again, this is an assumption. This isn't actual numbers, because what we don't know yet is how many kids actually reside in the Slater boundary that are now in K, right? And so to grandfather all of the current students, Slater would then open up with only 104. So essentially what I'm saying is that if you grandfathered every kid from now or who will enter K before 2019, then Slater will only be 104 students, which means it's only opening with a K. And so that's and I'll talk about its financial implications. And what I have to say about that 104 is also making the assumption, one of our priorities is currently that a student who is at a school, their sibling will get priority too, right? And, as a parent of twins, I will say that there is something to be said about having to drive to multiple schools and drop your kids off. But if you grandfather them, that 104 is going to drop. And so we also are incurring a lot of additional cost in terms of Slater. And this is just to be very transparent about the financial impact of this decision. So the first one I'll have to say is that the certificate of participation is already being paid for out of other revenue sources, right? We have developer fees that come in, we have lease revenue, but it is a $2.6 million cost for the next 19 years. By the time it opens, I think it will be at 17 years. There is an operating cost for staff at the site. This is about $600,000. That includes the clerks, that includes SCEFs, that includes the principal, that includes custodian. So it's a rough estimate, RTI teachers, that number sort of floats around, but it's about $600,000. And then of course, one of the decisions we made is that we would not pull portables off of the current sites until the boundaries are fully enacted. And so the district would incur about $9,000 per portable per year. And then, of course, if you multiply that by the total number of portables that are currently at essentially Landos, Bub, and Huff, you're going to look at around a cost of $225,000. So here's some things to consider. Our current policy of open enrollment does not really support board direction for neighborhood schools. It's not to say that open enrollment is a bad thing or a good thing. It just simply says that it flies against the direction that we were set on. Certain schools are at capacity. Huff is currently there. Bub, Landos will soon be right behind it. And then, the piece that we have is capacity also means traffic issues. I know that you've probably heard from certain city council members that live around Huff. And I know I've heard from them also, and they often talk about the overcrowding at the site also impacts the traffic. And when these schools were placed, there weren't really considerations about how you get traffic patterns in because life was different. Right now, everybody has 1, 2, 3 cars. Huff, again, we'll keep picking on them, is on a cul-de-sac. So there's no way, in order to get to the school, you have to drive in and then turn around, or you can do the back entrance, right? But again, it's a very hard school to get through, and that's the same at Landos. That is the same at Bub. Bub is a little bit different because you have a couple of thoroughfares that will take you through it. But it does increase the traffic. The more kids we have there, the more impact it has. And I think Castro and Mistral is another example where we've had to stagger the start times in order to accommodate the amount of traffic that actually comes through. The other piece of this is things to consider is that grandfathering all currently enrolled students means more portables, which means we're also going to spend more money. The sibling rule is hard to predict. My favorite rule of all 26 is one that says any intradistrict transfer from the year of 2004 will have priority X. There is one family that actually qualifies, and it has been 13 years since that rule is put in place. And so you can see what happens when you make a rule in order to, and I'm not arguing that this was to appease a particular group, but there's implications of grandfathering or allowing siblings could have a lasting impact that you have parents just like myself who have kids at 11 years apart, and they still have the ability to jump past someone who is simply coming in. And then, you know, the other thing is that the real question is, how long do we want this process to go? And how long do we want to phase this in? Which is another thing to consider. So the Enrollment's Priorities Task Force really needs some guidance. The SAATF made several recommendations and also suggested several models that they would like to look at. There are a lot of different considerations that the board could take into place that could drive the work of the Enrollment's Priorities Task Force. For instance, there has been conversations about using socioeconomic status as a possible proxy for diversification in schools because we can't use race by court precedents. And so considering things like that create an interesting approach to how you want to do priorities. There's also the notion of if you want open enrollment to continue, that changes also how we do it. The question that you had about if there was space at a particular site, do we allow them to go? And if so, is that for a year? Or is it for if they go to a school, do they get to stay there? The type of direction that you give the Enrollment's Priority Task Force will influence the type of suggestions and recommendations that come back. So we have a series of questions that we would like to take you through and sort of answer. And actually, I left my iPad and pen over there, so I got to run back over and grab it. But the question here is, thank you, is what is the vision for open enrollment? Are there variables that you would like us to consider? Thank you. And these variables could also play and could impact choice schools. So if the idea is that choice schools must reflect the overall population, and I'm not making a recommendation about that, but if the goal is for choice schools to reflect the overall population of the district in terms of free and reduced lunch and minority populations, that is something to take into account. If the goal is to eliminate the gap between poverty, so we have some sites that are currently at 93% free, 93% or 7% free and reduced lunch, and we have other sites that are at 88% free and reduced lunch. So if the idea is to bring parity among sites, that is something else that we can consider. If it is about driving distance to a particular school, so we've talked about this, or I've mentioned this a couple of times, if the interest is in zones, so some districts employ enrollment zones, and what that means is that if you're in a particular zone, you have the opportunity to apply to a school that is nearby, but you cannot apply to a school that is in a different part of the city. So a good example of this is Slater is a zone. You could apply to Therakoff and you could apply to Landals, but you could not apply to a Montaloma or Bub or Huff because they are too far, or Cassia, right? And so those zones have an impact. Another question in terms of direction is what is too small and what is too large. The longer this process drags out, the more impact it has. I know that several principals will probably like to talk about this, or you can ask some questions. But at some point, we have seen declining enrollment at Therakoff. We have seen declining enrollment at Castro. And so one of the earlier comments was from the BATF and sort of the past is that at some point a school becomes unsustainable to operate. And so does the board have a desire about that? And the reason why I ask is because that drives the conversation of how long the process will actually take. and when adjustments need to be made. So if you're comfortable for school getting smaller and then essentially building itself back up, and we're going to pick on Huff. Huff, I believe, opened with about 270 kids when it came back online. And then eventually its enrollment obviously has grown to 608. If you're comfortable with that, then that is something that we need to know, and that drives how long grandfathering or how long the enrollment priorities go. If the board says, look, under 200, under 150, under 100 students is really unsustainable, that drives the conversation so that we can run the numbers to look at what is the breaking point for a particular school based off of current trends. Should students leave a school, if they move from one attendance area to another, currently our policy says that if you enter Castro, you have priority at Castro regardless of where you move within the city. But is it the board's direction for us to explore the possibility of it only lasts for that school year? And that's part of their recommendation? Or is it that this is something that you would just simply like a recommendation to come back to the board about what that looks like? What type of time range for phase and boundaries are you looking at? Is it that you want the board were like in 2019, that it is just we're going to rip the Band-Aid off and every kid is going to go to the school that they have to go to, knowing that there are currently 341 students from last year that are going to be impacted, or 10% of the population? Or are you comfortable with it lasting for 2 years? Traditionally, if you were to open, and I'll talk about a high school, if you were to open a high school, you would not open a high school with a senior class. You would open it with a 9 through 11, and then you would let the 11th graders become the first senior class. So there's different ways of looking at that, and I think that's also part of what type of time range that you're thinking about phasing it in. And the last one is, if a student is grandfathered, do you want that grandfathering to apply to the younger sibling? So it's possible that a third grader could get grandfathered currently. A kindergarten could come in 2019. The parent you could force a parent to make a choice to go to their neighborhood school, or you could grandfather both kids into a particular site. What I would suggest to the board is at this point to give direction, but try not to be super specific about the guidelines that you want. You're more than welcome to, but the more specific you come, the less likely the Enrollment Priorities Task Force is going to come back to you with something that, if you're looking for something creative, the less likely that's going to happen, because my direction to them will be to follow board direction. And so we don't want to create we don't want to create a policy that actually contradicts what the board's directive is. And I will leave these questions up for you as you discuss those.
Dr. Rudolph, thank you so much for your time and your patience. Trustees, any questions? Would someone like to start first?
I'm interested in discussion, so my preference would be to have community comments and then board discussion.
So I hear that there are no questions. We'll move on to community comments. We have got 3 members of the community that would like to speak to this issue. I'm calling on Honorable Stephen Nelson as the first speaker. Former member of the Mountain View Wisconsin School District Board of Trustees.
Is there a timer?
Yes.
Yes, remember? Yeah.
Which is where?
Kathy Logo's the time.
Oh, there's nothing I can see like the
No,
city
you
council.
just gotta feel
Okay. Yeah, my name. Diversity and integration. Our community really values this. It's important for our community. And I'd urge you to please not go with all deliberate speed, because that's 15 years of grandfathering. But do it immediately. Grandfathering is really only available to families of the wealthy who have enough to provide their own transportation. The superintendent is unfortunately wrong. Everybody doesn't have 2 or 3 cars. We learned on the Castro issue of it getting moved, DI getting moved to the other side of the city, that there actually are families in Castro and Mistral and Therakoff that do not have any private vehicles. So disadvantaged families can't really participate in grandfathering. It's a wonderful thing he put there. This is an idea of you really do need to give some direction. I would suggest the board vision for enrollment should be points for 1, within the boundary, 2, diversity, economic diversity, as he said, in 3, probably smaller number of points for the distance for walking. School size, we've set 450 as a target. If we start saying, well, some should be 100 and the others should be 650, you got problems again. Should students leave a school if they don't live in the area? Absolutely. You move to the new school. What type of range for phasing? I'd say immediate. Maybe there's something about the 2-phase, 2-year. And if a student is not grandfathered, it does not apply to their younger sibling. You get rid of the grandfathering thing. I'd agree with what the voice said. Boundaries alone won't solve school overcrowding unless grandfathering is limited. I have some suggestions about how you could use the economic disadvantaged percentage to try to get it down from the big place it is now. The average is 37 in the district, to maybe try to have a goal of adjusting it to 19 to 56%, for instance, which is decreasing it significantly. I'll give this copy to the superintendent. Dr. Skelly, when he was here, said what the result of all deliberate speed was for him. He was born after Brown versus Education, but yet by the time he was a 12-year-old kid in Western Virginia, he was still in a segregated school. He didn't have the advantage until he went to junior high of having a mentor, a black man, who could show him black men actually are just as smart and just as respectable and just as honorable a mentor as any white man.
Thank you, Trustee Nelson. Second member of the community who would like to speak about this issue is the Honorable Bill Lambert,
Another former board member.
another former board member of the Mountain.
Contemporaneous with the prior speaker, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe you're correct.
So, Bill Lambert, I'm a resident of Montaloma neighborhood. So, last year,
Can you speak into the microphone?
last year we as a community adopted a neighborhood school paradigm to justify opening Slater. And I'd like us to think about that. I believe that really this neighborhood's paradigm is a fiction. And it's a fiction by choice. 30% of our kids in our school district go to schools that are not in their neighborhood. Some choose to go to our 2 choice programs, which is an institutionalized choice for about 800 kids in our school district. And the rest go to other schools. And what's, I think, more significant is that choice is not distributed evenly. There's a disparate impact on probably over half of the schools in our district, especially Montaloma and Therakoff and Landals, where almost 50% of the kids either go to one of the choice schools or do interdistrict transfers. So we are really a community of choice. And we saw how difficult it was when we did the boundary task force to try to pigeonhole sort of a neighborhood school paradigm into the boundaries. We're going to face the same thing again when we start talking about the interdistrict enrollment policies. What I suggest for this board to do is to sort of steer away from some of the details that Dr. Rudolph was speaking about and start looking at a very high level of our community. What do we want? Do we want choice in our schools? How much do we want? The parents clearly want it. 30% of them are choosing it right now. Others choose to go to their neighborhood schools. Do we want some schools that are going to be completely neighborhood, others that are going to move around and have different opportunities? Do we want diversity, as Trustee Nelson or former Trustee Nelson spoke about? I think I'd like you as a board to come up with, and I think this would help the task force to look at very high levels, very high objectives of what we want. What are the objectives? And that is going to help you make your decisions when you get inundated by the public, asking you questions, basically pleading with you to give them special opportunities and things like that. You're going to need to sort of toe the line and make the tough choices, and having a long-term vision of what you want our school district to be is going to help you make those tough decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Lambert. Our third and final speaker from the community is Sarah Livnot.
So I also served on the task force last year dealing with boundaries, and absolutely agree with everything that Bill said. I think number one, the board, first of all, the task force really looks to the board for guidance, and having that sort of those high level principles or values that are driving our decisions, I think would be immensely helpful versus getting, kind of bullet point by bullet point feedback at a very detailed level. Because the task force is going to have to grapple with a lot of questions, right? And we won't necessarily be able to come to you with every question and ask you to answer it, right? But if you can give us the vision and the principles that we're operating under, and a kind of a prioritization of those principles, then that would be, I think, a fantastic way for us to get started. And the task force last year kind of operated that way to the point where we were unable to have a conversation about diversity, right? Socioeconomic diversity. And so that was one of the reasons why we suggested as a task force to have this enrollment priorities task force so that we could potentially tackle that topic. And so I think having guidance from you on that would be very, very helpful. And just a plug for diversity. We live in a very diverse city. A lot of people live here for that reason. But our schools are not necessarily diverse in the same way. And for the schools that have a higher percentage of kids of low socioeconomic means, even though they may potentially be able to get high quality education because we have fantastic principals and teachers, there are additional impacts to those communities by not having a diverse population, particularly on the socioeconomic level. Parent participation, after school programs, all those things that we talk about and that we value as parents and as community members. So I really do hope that we are able to tackle this this time around in an as efficient manner as possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Livnot. We'll begin our discussion phase. Trustees.
And I just
Dr.
want to
Rudolph?
echo just one thing that they said. The point of these questions is not for a specific answer. The point of these questions is just these are things that have came up over the course of time. And so I'm not looking for you to opine exactly on bullet 2 and say yes or no. We are really looking for guideposts that drive the work, and then we can go from there.
Well, it sounds to me like you want two levels of answers. We want big picture guidance, but we also want something to hang our hats on. So
is that true? Are we looking for two different layers of answers here, Dr. Rudolph? Or are we looking at the higher level? And these are just exemplar questions that we could use as something to think about and then opine on the higher level perspective.
This is really about a higher level. I think something about school size, that is a critical question, but it's only critical if your concern is that when a school is too small, that it is no longer viable, right? And so then we have to stay around an artificial number that sort of pumps a school up. So if the goal was 200, then we have to find a way to keep a school at 200. But again, these are just, as we thought about the enrollment priorities, these are questions to just sort of get you thinking about what is it that the board would like the task force to accomplish. And again, that's why I said at the beginning, the less specificity that you give, right, the higher you stay up, the more creative the enrollment's priorities task force can be. The more specific you get, and I think both of them will say this, when you give a very specific direction, regardless of how many people are kicking and screaming, my response to them is the board gave you very specific guidance. This is what the board expects. This is what I plan on bringing back to the board. So at this part of this conversation, I don't think that direction, that specific direction is needed. I think it's about the higher level things. If diversity is a thing that you want us to consider, there are a lot of different models out there for us to consider about diversity. I think the challenge is that you have neighborhood schools, you have choice. How do you want that to interplay with each other, or do you not want it to interplay? Do you believe that choice is fine at 2 schools and everything else is about neighborhoods? And it's wrestling with those types of questions that will sort of help us.
So those were examples of my thinking that, it can't just be words. There needs to be some concepts behind it. So I believe what we agreed to last year and through all that work is an emphasis on neighborhood schools. So if we believe in neighborhood schools, we believe that people in the Huff neighborhood are entitled to have a school in their neighborhood, and the people in the Bub neighborhood are entitled to have a school in their neighborhood, for example. Regarding sustainability, regarding size, it's difficult for me to reconcile an idea of a school becoming too small when we are also grappling with possibly thousands of new students coming in. So I am not worried about any of our schools being too small, and I am personally a vote for helping to temporarily sustain any school that is smaller than another. And there are specific models for small schools, so I'm not worried about small school. I'm interested in, so you mentioned neighborhood schools and choice schools. So it's much easier for me to visualize methods of diversifying choice schools than methods of diversifying neighborhood schools. So for example, when I mentioned Huff, if our value is neighborhood schools, then Huff is not going to be a very diverse school by underrepresented minorities and low-income kids. So, there's an inherent tension there. So the idea that neighborhood schools could be neighborhood schools, seems like a good ballpark for me, but I am, interested in creative ideas about diversifying choice programs. I think we're primarily talking about Stevenson. My sense is that because the model of Mistral is Spanish speakers and primarily English speakers, and you're trying to get a mixture of them, that a diversity is not as much an issue as it is at Stevenson. But because Stevenson is a general program, a generalized program, I could see using some sort of structure for diversifying it by economic basis or points or however you want to say it. Your idea of zones, I don't know what that means. I have an idea what it could be. So I'd be interested in, the committee exploring that.
We need to get going. I'm sorry, I have to cut you off.
Minutes left.
We got not that much time left, so if you could wrap up, please. Thank you, Madam Women. Okay, I'd like to chime in. I'm interested in economic diversity. And I'm interested in neighborhood schools and zones. And I'd like to see the choice schools the way they are, functioning the way they are, because it's a selection process. But when you look into socioeconomic diversity and zoning and neighborhood schools, all that could be, I believe, in my opinion, reconciled. We spoke about that at the previous meetings last year before we took a final vote. The district came out adamantly in support of that concept and idea and would like us to follow through with it. Honorable Caldonado or Blakely or Wilson?
Caldonado. Dr. Rudolph, on the question of, on the first topic, I kind of agree with the way Trustee Wheeler put it. I think we should support neighborhood schools. I also think that choice schools are a good thing. I like the opportunity for parents to be able to choose something that they think is good for their family and their kids. The zones thing makes sense to me. I'd like the committee to look into that. And I'm thinking of the shark fin because if there were an opening at Landell's and a family from Willigate wanted to go there, I think they have a stronger claim to that than somebody from across town. And zones that enable people nearby to get to that school makes sense. I'm also not worried about school sizes being too small. I think we fixed the too big problem once we use the new boundaries. I hope, at least for now, for some short period of time, I think we maybe have made that problem less bad. But I'm not worried about a school size being too small for the same reason that Trustee Wheeler mentioned. If a family moves from one boundary to another, I think they should change schools. Phase-in time, I think your idea that you open a high school without a senior class, which means 1 year of grandfathering and then everybody go to the school that they live near, sounds fine with me. I'd be curious to know if that means Slater might open without a 5th grade. Because then there's people that live near Slater that would prefer to go to it, but if it's not even an option for 5th grade, then they have, I don't know, maybe you have a small 5th grade. And I don't think we should be grandfathering this to siblings for a long time. I think that we're addressing an acute problem with the boundary change, that there's portables all over the place at some of our schools, and I want to fix that by implementing the boundaries as fast as we can.
Thank you, Greg.
2 minutes.
Diversity is a priority for me as well, but I agree that it may be a bit difficult to reconcile with the neighborhood schools, which we have agreed that is the priority. So if there's a way to kind of synchronize those or emphasize the diversity a little bit, I'd be interested in exploring those options. I feel differently than Trustee Caldonado about if students need to leave a school when they move from one attendance area to another. I'm not interested in promoting gaming the system, but there are families that just keep getting booted out of their rental properties. And at some point, I'd like there to be some kind of I would like the committee to consider some kind of hardship exceptions or escape valves for people that have, in particular, been at a school for some number of years, maybe not a year or two, but there are some families that will just go bouncing around from school to school to school, and that doesn't feel right to me, and I'd like there to be some way to remedy that. And I think the grandfathering needs to be limited because we do need to fill up the schools, but I do think there should be some grandfathering. Maybe it's 5th grade students, maybe siblings can come along that first year, but the siblings don't get grandfathered in forever. So I think we need to consider some grandfathering, but not have it be extensive. And I'll pass the baton to Trustee Wilson.
So I'll just pick up with the grandfathering issue. I think I'm the only person in the room who would have a person or child who would be moved immediately. And I think we created these boundaries, and if my son gets moved in 4th grade, I'm okay with that. Kids change classrooms every year and cohorts, and if he has to go with all of his neighbors and community members, I'm 100% okay with that. I think we are going to be revisiting boundaries again in maybe 4 or 5 years, so if we wait too long, we're going to be moving students yet again, and I don't think that that's fair. So the longer we prolong this, I think we're doing a disservice. I love your idea of the diversity at the choice programs. I know it's not on here, but I think we should cap certain schools that have too large of a percent of kids hemorrhaging out of them to go to the choice programs. I don't know if that's part of an enrollment priority, but we can't have 40% at a single school going to a choice program. I think we need to look at limiting that. I will get specific. Enrollment priority number one, in my opinion, needs to go. You don't finish where you start. You go where you're zoned. Otherwise, the entire 3.5-year process of boundaries has been an effort in vain. I like the idea of zones as well. Reiterate. And again, the grandfathering of siblings, I do not think that should apply. I say we made the boundaries. We're going to be putting how many million? Nearly 3.5 million into Slater for year one. With
3.2
the COP
excluded
plus
in
the
costs.
600. Yeah. Let's get it started.
Okay.
That might be too specific.
Any other discussion points, trustees?
Was that useful?
Yeah, Dr. Rudolph, any major gaps in your scorecard that you want filled
No,
out?
I think to sort of summarize what I'm hearing is that there's clearly support for neighborhood schools, but the board is okay with some type of flexibility, provided that it doesn't undermine the neighborhood school principle, whether it's through zones, walking distance, or something else. Diversity is clearly a concern, and any efforts to sort of tackle diversity through an enrollment process helps, even possibly at a choice school. But what I'm hearing, unless I'm wrong, is that choice in some type of fashion is okay in the district. What is not okay is and I'm going to preface this with a second point, is that what's not okay is the gaming of the system, where you move one place and then you move another, which limits our ability to have someone who lives within the neighborhood attend the neighborhood school. But there is, at least from one trustee, a concern about hardships and making sure that if somebody's being forced to move to different places from place to place, that the committee or there's some type of process where we can take that into account. Size is not a concern. Grandfathering is supported on a limited basis. Yes.
Too small of a size isn't a concern.
Correct. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Large size. We've already
Still a
tackled the
concern.
large.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. The large is like we
Hopefully
can't.
fixed. Maybe fixed. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that is enough to get us started, and that's broad enough that gives the committee the opportunity to really dive in and then investigate some items. And then the goal here is that not only will we pose initial recommendations to focus groups, we will bring back initial recommendations back to the board and ideas to get more guidance before we move into the final phase, which is the actual selection of it. So it will be a little similar to the SAATF towards the end, where we come back and we say, here's what we have, but we also will bring back other forms of community feedback. Is there something that I've missed? Yes.
I'd like to say one thing, which is your example of somebody who could, from one neighborhood, a neighborhood could get 3 people on it via various mechanisms. I would encourage the selectors to watch out for that and try to minimize that as much as they can.
Yeah, the caveat is the choice school is the third one. But I can tell you from looking at the applicants right now, you're looking at a maximum of 2 from one particular neighborhood.
Yeah, 1 minute.
So Dr. Rudolph, did you recap that you heard direction to phase in quicker?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
It seems that this is the idea is that this should not take 12 years or 13 years to implement, that this should happen within the next couple of years, whether it's 5th grade, whether it's fourth and 5th grade. There's some flexibility about how that looks, but we should come back with a recommendation as to how long that looks and then its impact on siblings too.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
Is there something else?
No. Is there a way for us to just get rid of this?
Yeah, I just moved to drop items.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. Thank you for the presentation. Trustees, thank you so much. Greg?
Yeah, I'd moved to drop items 11, 12, and 13 from consideration tonight. So we can finish immediately.
I would really like to talk about number 13 very briefly.
Which is
Or no, I'm
what?
sorry, 12.
I don't think we have time, but
It's 10:30.
Okay, I requested last time that we talk about school assignments, and I'd like to make sure that so
You can send me an email too.
oh, okay. How about next meeting?
Yep.
Time
at
to
the
do
next
it.
meeting.
Done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Blakely. At this time, we will adjourn our meeting of the Mountain View Wisdom School Board of Trustees at 10:30 p.m. Thank you all very much.
Remember, like which people go. Remember that? Yeah.
As I look at principal's copies.
Yes.
You don't have coverage.
Yes.
You can go to any you want.
You can freeze them.
Well,
And you can,
well, you can.
even without any.
We'll talk about it next week.
I hope so.
This way. You won't tell me.